Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Age Differently. I'm Darius Nagamwal, and I'm here with my friend and collaborator, Peter Callan. Peter, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Darius?
I'm wonderful. It's nice. Peter's up from Miami today, and he's brought it's December when we're recording this, and last week the temperature was in the 20s. Peter shows up, the temperature's in the 60s.
That's what I do. That's just what I do.
Brings smiles and sunshine and warmth everywhere he goes. And we're going to need it for today's conversation. We're going to talk about something that affects 55% of men over the course of their lifetime, that being divorce. And, we don't live our lives with temerity. It's a new word for those out there. I just learned it means fear. It's a lot better way of saying it. So I'm going to lead off with a little bit of a lighthearted observation. And Peter, I'm going to ask you a question. You know why divorces are so expensive?
I don't, Darius. You want to tell me?
Because they're worth it. That's an old joke from Willie Nelson. So we're going to be talking about divorce. It's and all kidding aside, it's a very challenging, painful subject. We're going to talk about the decision to divorce when you know it's time to walk out the door, the emotional and practical challenges that men face, dealing with your significant other for years to come after if you have children, and then finally, how to really rediscover yourself and create your life. So before we jump in, we'll talk. I'm divorced. I've been divorced now for 15 years. Peter, you're also divorced.
Yeah, I've been divorced and remarried, but I've been divorced for 40 years, I would say. Yeah. And we both had different experiences with it.
We did.
And before I continue sharing my experience, I just want to comment on the introductory comments you made, because divorce is also very much a situation that requires, that is a choice of how much damage and chaos is inflicted. So I want to kind of highlight that, let our audience consider that perhaps how much chaos, how much damage, how much emotional disruption may be something that is more within, as men, our control than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One, I'll temper that with you can't control what happens, and the chaos, the damage isn't always initiated by the man, but you can choose how you want to respond to that. And the second thing I'll say is that when you choose to divorce, or at least when I did, it was an incredibly, incredibly difficult, painful decision to make, because in a lot of ways, when you're divorcing, it's like you are losing somebody, and there's a lot of grief that comes up with that process. So you have to recognize that those emotions that you're feeling, they're normal. This is a very, very weighty decision that you make, and you can't make it lightly. I can share that there was a moment in my marriage, and my marriage had been struggling for a while. There was a moment of absolute clarity when the line was crossed, and I knew that's it. It's over, and it's time to proceed down that path now. So I would say for anybody who's out there struggling with this, one, talk to people, right? Don't do what I did and go into a cocoon and try and figure it all out yourself, because it doesn't work. Two, be aware of what it is you're feeling. Three, obviously, go to counseling, do all those things to try and put it back together, because you love this person at one point in time. And then when you make the decision, recognize this is a very weighty decision that you're making. So reflect on it, think about it, meditate on it, exercise on whatever you need to do until you come to that place deep within you that you know this is the right decision, not only for you, But for everybody else that is involved, your significant other, the kids, the families, you got to get to that point, or at least I needed to get to that point where it wasn't just the right decision for me. It was the right decision for everybody.
Thanks for sharing all of that, Darius. You and I have had very different experiences with divorce. And so um, I interject one viewpoint, you interject a different one. And both of us are right and both of us could be wrong depending on the individual situation, right? So thanks for sharing that. I'll talk a little bit about my marriage and my divorce. I've been married twice. The angel that I married the first time, and I'll explain why she's an angel. I was 18 at the time, and we had my oldest son was born months before, and I didn't know it then, but I should have known that marriage wasn't really for me, and the obligations and responsibilities I wasn't ready for. On top
At
of
the
that, I
age
was
of 18, Peter, that's a lot of weight to put on your shoulders.
Yes.
I mean, those are broad, good-looking shoulders, but that's a lot of weight on any 18-year-old.
Yeah. And so I did try for a number of years to keep the marriage together, even though it just was very difficult for me through undergraduate and graduate school. And then at some moment, I just realized I couldn't do it anymore. I was quite blessed, and this may sound obtuse and kind of strange to the audience as they hear this, to have had taken a class in child psychology in my undergraduate coursework. And then in law school, I took a class on family law. And so when it came time to disintegrate my marriage, to divorce my first wife, my focus wasn't on my ego, it wasn't on myself, but somehow I was directed on whatever we did should be done in the best interest of the children. And my first wife, her name is Ethel, she kind of agreed with it. So we, as amicably as could possibly be done in that difficult environment, separated, and then worked for years to just do our best. And again, in divorce situations, when it comes to children, when it comes to relationships, you're just doing your best. There's no perfect solution. There's no perfect balance.
No.
And things are going to be chaotic, disruptive, emotionally draining and taxing, like you said. The range of emotions that you experience, whether you're the initiator or not, it's ridiculous, to be honest with you. And I suffered it, the guilt, the shame, as a father. And, but kind of the outcome that validates the approach we took. And again, this worked for me, it may not work for others or for you, is that Ethel is the godmother of one of my daughters, my second wife, and she's remained involved and engaged in the family. My sisters consider her sisters today, even though we're not married. So something worked. And I believe the focus on the children can make a huge difference rather than just focusing on me or, focusing on the relationship. Even though the relationship was the initiator, I understand that. That's what brought the family and the relationship together into marriage. If you're divorcing, that's not the focus that I believe serves you best.
So let's talk about divorce. If you're making the decision to divorce, it doesn't happen overnight. It's an extended process.
Yes, it is.
Typically is going to take you 12 to 18 months. You are going to go through filing, where you file with the court. You're going to go through mediation, where hopefully you can get to a settlement without having to go to a trial, when you each present your facts to a judge who then decides what needs to be done. And every one of those steps is time consuming, it's expensive, but most importantly, it can be emotionally disruptive, because the entire process, you're sorting through the dissolution of assets, you're sorting through custody, and you're supporting through the finances. And now it's wonderful, Peter, to hear that you're able to have an amicable one. There's a whole community and court system set up, and a whole industry with lawyers, because you're an anomaly in this situation.
I realize that.
And it takes, the other thing I'll say is, it takes both parties to approach it with that level of maturity to be able to do. So yeah, referring to Ethel as an angel makes a lot of sense. For those of our listeners that are in that spot, you guys can move on and listen to another episode. For the rest of you that are going through this, or who have been through this and had a different experience than the one that Peter had, that is more in alignment with the courts, and unfortunately heightened emotions and unproductive conversations, we want to talk through how to potentially engage productively with your ex, how to focus on yourself, and how to really rebuild your life. Because if you are making this decision to divorce, you are going to have to rebuild your life.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, Peter, you mentioned this earlier.
Darius, before we do, just one other thing I need to mention, because it was the approach I took. There is another way that divorce can happen, and it includes a contract, a separation agreement. That can
prenup?
be entered. Well, not a prenup. In some states, in the state of New York, I believe, there's a separation agreement that the parties can sign, and then after a period of time, just go file a divorce.
Yeah. Understood. So let's talk about the emotional impact of divorce and the emotions that can come up. You said about 2 minutes ago, the emotions were ridiculous. And when I look back on my divorce, the emotions ran the gamut. There was a ton of sadness that this is done. There was regret. What could I have done better? There was shame, right? I failed at this marriage that was so important to me. There was anger. There was resentment for some of the behaviors that I was seeing that I never would have expected. And how I dealt with that was, I found productive outlets for those emotions to be released. I started taking guitar lessons and learned to play guitar. Now, I'm no Eddie Van Halen, but I can play. I started taking martial arts again. I ended up getting a black belt in Kung Fu. So I wanted to exercise both the creativity as well as get the emotions out of the body. And I found a therapist to talk to as I was going through this, because the whole journey, the whole process, it's so foreign. It is just something that you don't expect, you don't see, and you're in a totally different world. And it's overwhelming.
Yeah. Hopefully for our audience, if they experience it, it's just once in their lifetime. But it's still very overwhelming, daunting, and unexpected challenge.
It is. And it's interesting, because I remember I was at the gym, and there was a neighbor lived 5 doors down. I said hello to him, and he looked at me, and he looked away without saying a word.
Explain.
Shunned me.
Why?
Well, he wouldn't talk to me, so I don't know why. So all I could say to him as I walked by was, hey, walk a mile in my shoes before you judge me. So that's why I go back to the whole foreign, unknown situation, and why it's so important. Again, I had my therapist, John. I still talk to John wonderful guy. Talk to your friends, reconnect with your friends. Take that emotion that's getting stuck in the body and release it. If you're a runner, you run. If you're a weightlifter, you lift weights. If you're not physically active, you go for a walk. You do something. If you're a singer, you sing. You do something to release those energies so that they don't get trapped in you. You don't want that chronic stress trapped in you.
Energies and emotions. Are you saying ignore the emotion, or what do you do with the emotional
You
aspect of it?
Feel the emotion and release the emotion.
And then engage in one of these other activities.
To release
Focus
the
your-
emotion, right? So if you're a singer, you sing, right? If you've got all that pent up energy, you find a way to sit with it, but to healthily release it,
Release it. Yeah.
right? Because there's other options you can do. You know this as well as that. You can choose to numb. You can choose to distract. You can choose to addict.
Well, they're all distractions. And I think that's the focus that I'd like to highlight. Which distraction best serves you? And we're talking about, exercise and and it could be board games, something that directs your energy in a more positive way,
Yeah.
as opposed to something which is trying to numb the emotion.
Correct.
We're not talking about numbing the emotion or ignoring the emotion.
No, you got to feel that emotion. Yeah, because the interesting thing is once you get through the process of divorce, if you don't have children, you're done. You can separate and choose how you want to be in each other's lives. If you have children, you're going to be in each other's lives one way or another. Now, the frequency will go down after they leave high school because you won't see them as frequent, but you'll still see them at weddings. You'll still see them for grandchildren. They will still be in your life in one way, shape, or form. So one of the things I've always tried to do as I've co-parented is never to engage, to walk away before things got heated, and to never, ever disparage my ex in front of my children. I don't think that's appropriate to
healthy.
do. I don't want to put them in the middle of any situation. It's always focused on building that relationship with your kids and doing everything you can to prevent that tension, any hostility, anything from coming through.
Again, I'd like to highlight this, that for me was such a powerful anchor. If you do things in the best interest of your children, then your own selfish interest can't override, whatever you're feeling towards your spouse will override, I should say, whatever you're feeling towards your ex-spouse or towards your relationship.
Will be overridden by the kids. Yeah, I get it. And that's why we turn the other cheek. That's why we
Mhm.
rise above it. I think it's also important to note from a financial perspective, when you choose to get divorced, it has a major impact on your financial situation. I have a good friend, and
Yes, it does.
this individual is living with their partner unhappily because they do not want to move out and initiate the financial separation of assets because of the expense as well as the cost moving forward. So that is something, when we go back to making that decision, it's a factor that needs to be factored in, and then it will need to be factored in moving forward as well. Because the standard of living that you may have experienced as a married couple doesn't necessarily continue.
No. It's like doubling your expenses, right?
Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways.
On the same income.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. So let's talk about, we've been through, divorce can be challenging. It can be rough. And I made the joke earlier, tongue in cheek, about they're expensive because they're worth it. Let's talk about how you and I got divorced and then embarked on a journey to grow and reiterate and reinvent ourselves to really become the first step or another step towards the people that we are today. So let's talk about the importance of reinventing or finding yourself after the divorce.
Well, this goes back to a topic that we've reiterated a couple of times, and that are baselines for both of us. And that's just the persona of constantly wanting to learn
Mm-hmm.
and continuously developing personally and growing personally. And so it doesn't really, and so if this is a baseline for all endeavors of our lives, let's assume that for a second, and that's what we're inviting the audience to take a look at. Then whether it's divorce or any other aspect of our lives, any other episode in our lives, post-divorce, you reinvent yourself. You redefine who.
How did you reinvent yourself? What did you do coming out of your divorce?
Well, the first thing I did was figure out what I found joy in.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of just relationships. And things I did was like I started doing triathlons, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
something that would challenge me physically. I obviously dated and tried to figure out if I were to get married again, because I still had my boys, remember?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of woman would be a suitable mother to my two boys and a suitable companion that I would want to live my entire life with. That was years after I had been divorced. I didn't immediately start looking for a marital relationship. And then just in terms of things that I had not given as much 100% focus, my work career, my personal development, because remember before it was diluted with caring for my wife and my children and figuring out what they needed prior to, or as much as I needed something. And once I was divorced, I realized, and I knew this was the reason why I needed to be divorced. I needed to discover freedom. At 18, you don't really have a sense of yourself and freedom.
Well, I'll say, Peter, I got married when I was 32, and when I got divorced, the first question I had to ask myself is, who am I? Because I had lost myself. And you raised a point about finding things that bring you joy. Like, who am I? What do I enjoy? And how do I want to create the next chapter of my life? And for you, it was triathlons. For me, it was martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For you, it was yoga and meditation. For me, it was picking up a guitar and putting a band together and starting to explore that side of myself. And yeah, dating's an entirely separate episode, but after you've gotten divorced, you're going to start dating after a period of time.
Likely you are.
Right? For me, I took a period of time off because, again, those questions, who am I? What do I like? What do I want to do with this next chapter of my life? I needed some time to think through those questions and not be distracted.
So you paused before you were dating?
I did. I paused. And I knew I was going to start dating because I remember clear as a bell. I woke up one day and I thought, I am so happy right now. Yes, this has been challenging, but I've got a path forward. I'm in a really good spot. I like being single. And then a little hammer in the back of my head said, oh, you're done. You're going to meet somebody now. And sure enough, within a week. Because I had gotten to the point where I liked being by myself. And I was quite comfortable with the band and martial arts and going to the gym and work career and the relationship I was building with my sons. But yeah, that pause for me was essential.
Would you recommend it for our audience?
I would recommend that people do what they need to do to get through. And
you knew that was a leading question, right?
And if they absolutely, if they need to get out and they want to start dating earlier, go ahead. If they need that time, that pause, take that time, take that pause to get to know yourself.
Again, we're not urging or trying to define for you what's best for you. We're just looking at and exploring options we took and see if there's one little gem that you take away from it.
One little nugget. That's all we ask. The other thing that I'll talk about is how I re-engaged with my network after I got separated. So over time in my marriage, my relationships with my close network, I had allowed to slowly dissipate and disintegrate would be a better word. There were close friends of mine that I hadn't talked to in 15 years. And so for a period of 3 to 5 years, that became an enormous focus in my life, pulling back those relationships, pulling back those key individuals that I loved and that I'd had either fallings out with or just no effort. And I put that back together with the only word I can use is ferocity, because I really focused on re-engaging that network.
In retrospect, how did that benefit you?
Retrospect, it was probably one of the smartest things I've ever done in my life, because now I have a wonderful support network when I'm going through something, or when I need a sounding board, or when they're going through something. It's a community, and the community stretches all the way from California up to Canada, down to Florida, one of the newer members of my network sitting across from me, all the way over to Europe. So
Yes.
I can't stress enough, and we have a whole podcast on the importance of male relationships. And if you haven't listened to it, you're going through a divorce, please listen to that episode so that you can get some best practices on how to re-engage with the people who know who you are, right? Not that surface veneer that you put on a day-to-day basis, but the guy that you grew up and did probably some questionable things, that know who you are and that love you and that accept you for that.
And that's the big one, accepting.
Yeah.
They accept you.
They accept you. So once you go through the divorce and you're building your new life, Peter, what kind of advice would you have for somebody that is, going through the process, almost out of the process, based on what you went through?
Again, it seems my experience is very different from most. So I would just say, just from a more aware perspective, do what you did, which is re-anchor yourself
That's an excellent term.
to what worked for you in the past and see if it will work for you today.
But think about that, because I never thought about that until you said it. That's what I did when I was lost, because I was lost. I re-anchored myself physically through martial arts in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
I re-anchored myself creatively through the band and through music. I re-anchored myself professionally. I focused on my career. I re-anchored myself emotionally with my friends and my family.
Yeah.
And I re-anchored myself spiritually. I started surfing again. And anybody who surfs, Carlton, we're talking to you, and thank you again for the feedback. It's a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
That was exactly it.
Yeah. Notice how it's at all
Re-anchor.
levels of your being,
It
which is some of our focus, or is our
Yeah.
intended focus in a lot of these podcasts. If we're not just talking to the head or the body or the heart, but the spirit, the soul is also involved. And that is what I hope we impress upon our audience. That's the whole of the being.
That's the whole. So our call to action coming out of this episode, I think we just kind of came up with it. If you are considering it, obviously approach it very cautiously, checking in with your head, your heart, and your soul before making any rash decisions. And if you are in the process of going through it, find your anchors and re-anchor yourself.
One more thing.
Please.
Yeah, I think this sometimes helps in those chaotic and disturbing moments of a divorce. Remembering that the children have a priority, and
Always.
it's not just you. And even though it would seem everything, the genesis of it comes from you and the relationship,
Yeah.
now you have these innocent beings who are going to suffer this. How do you control that damage a bit? Is,
Yeah.
I think, good focus.
Yeah, how I try and do that, Peter, is I remind myself that at one point in time, I thought I wanted to spend the rest of my life with my ex-partner. So there's love there, and there always will be love there.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
And then number two, I always look at my ex-wife as a great teacher. I've learned so much about myself through my relationship with her, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Good.
So do you have any words on this one, or are we going to go directly to a wrap-up?
Don't believe. Oh, yes, I do.
Oh, he always has words. All right. Some words from Peter to conclude this episode.
So let the river flow as the waters do, without a preference. Love embraces the live, the living. In the garden of hearts, let no judgment reside. For in love's sanctuary, all differences subside.
Beautiful. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone. Again, feedback, questions, comments, agedifferently.com. Appreciate you guys listening. And if this was helpful, subscribe or forward it on to somebody else in your network who would benefit. Thank you again, Peter.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure.